The transport ship shook as it entered the docking bay of the Velthari diplomatic station. Yuna held onto her seat and looked out the small window. The station was huge, bigger than any building she had ever seen on Earth. It floated in the darkness of space like a metal mountain, with lights blinking on every surface. "Are you nervous?" asked Tae-woo, sitting next to her. He was checking his translation device for the 100th time. Yuna thought about the question. Was she nervous? She was about to meet the Velthari, a species that most of the galaxy considered extremely dangerous. They stood 3 meters tall. They had scales like armor. Their claws could cut through metal, and their teeth were the stuff of nightmares. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly curious." Tae-woo laughed softly. "Only you would be curious about meeting predators who could eat us for breakfast." The ship landed with a gentle bump. Yuna stood up and grabbed her bag. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms. She had spent years learning about different species across the galaxy, but the Velthari were special. They had refused contact with almost everyone for centuries. Now, suddenly, they wanted peace talks, and for some reason, they had specifically requested humans to help with the cultural exchange. The reason was simple, though not very flattering. Humans were considered harmless by galactic standards. They had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons. Other species looked at humans and saw soft, weak creatures who somehow managed to survive despite having no obvious advantages. The Velthari, it seemed, found humans so unthreatening that they were willing to tolerate their presence. Yuna didn't mind being underestimated. She had learned long ago that being seen as harmless had its own kind of power. The airlock opened, and she stepped onto the station. The air was warm and dry, much warmer than she preferred. Velthari came from a desert planet, and they kept their stations heated to match. She would have to get used to it. A Velthari guard was waiting for them. He was enormous, easily twice Yuna's height. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his yellow eyes watched her with cold interest. He said nothing, just turned and walked away, expecting them to follow. Yuna and Tae-woo exchanged looks and hurried after him. The station's corridors were wide and tall, built for beings much larger than humans. Yuna felt like a child walking through a giant's castle. Everything was made of dark metal, with very little decoration. The Velthari valued function over beauty, it seemed. They walked for what felt like forever before reaching a large door. The guard pressed his clawed hand against a panel, and the door slid open. Inside was a room that seemed to serve as both an office and a throne room. At the far end, sitting on a raised platform, was the largest Velthari Yuna had ever seen. Matriarch Gris was ancient by Velthari standards, over 200 years old. Her scales had faded from green to a silvery gray, but her eyes were sharp and bright. Scars covered her arms and face, evidence of countless battles. She wore simple clothing, but everything about her radiated power and authority. "You are the humans," she said. Her voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "I am Yuna, cultural liaison and xenobiologist," Yuna said, bowing slightly. "This is Tae-woo, communications specialist. We are honored to be here." The matriarch studied them for a long moment. Her expression was impossible to read. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh. "So small," she said. "So soft. The galaxy sends us their weakest, and expects us to be impressed." Tae-woo stiffened beside her, but Yuna kept her face calm. "We are what we are, matriarch. We hope to prove useful despite our size." Useful. The matriarch tasted the word like it was strange food. "We shall see. You will be housed in the East Wing. Your duties will begin tomorrow. But first, there is something you must understand." She leaned forward, and suddenly her presence felt overwhelming. Yuna fought the urge to step back. "Our cubs are on this station," the matriarch said. "The environmental systems in their nursery wing have failed. They cannot regulate their body temperature yet, so they have been moved to temporary quarters near your section. This was not planned, but it cannot be helped." Yuna's heart jumped with excitement. Velthari cubs. Very few outsiders had ever seen Velthari young. This was an incredible opportunity for research and understanding. I would be honored to help with the cubs in any way, she said. The matriarch's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand. I am not inviting you to help. I am warning you. Do not approach our young. Do not speak to them. Do not even look at them if you can avoid it. Yuna blinked. May I ask why? Because they are learning to be warriors. The matriarch's voice was hard. From the moment they can walk, Velthari children are trained in the ways of strength and fierceness. They learn to see the universe as a place of threats, and they learn to meet those threats with power. Your presence will confuse them. Confuse them how? The matriarch made a dismissive gesture. You are too soft. Too gentle. Our cubs must learn that the galaxy is harsh and unforgiving. If they spend time with creatures like you, they may develop wrong ideas. They may think that softness is acceptable, that weakness can survive. Yuna wanted to argue. She wanted to say that softness wasn't the same as weakness, that gentleness required its own kind of strength. But she held her tongue. She was a guest here. She had to be careful. I understand, she said simply. We will stay away from the cubs. The matriarch nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. The guard will show you to your quarters. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, the real work begins. They were dismissed. Yuna followed the guard back through the endless corridors, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. When they finally reached their quarters, which were surprisingly comfortable despite being designed for much larger beings, Taewoo let out a long breath. Well, that was terrifying, he said. Yuna smiled slightly. She's just protective of her people. I can respect that. Did you hear what she said about the cubs? They train them to be fierce from birth. No wonder the Velthari are so aggressive. They never learn any other way to be. Yuna sat down on the oversized bed, her feet dangling far from the floor. That's what I was thinking too. It's sad, in a way. Imagine growing up being told that the only thing that matters is strength, that any softness is a flaw to be eliminated. Taewoo shook his head. Different species, different cultures. We can't judge them by human standards. I know, Yuna said, but she couldn't help feeling a strange ache in her chest when she thought about those cubs, somewhere nearby on this station, being taught that gentleness was wrong. That night, Yuna had trouble sleeping. The room was too warm, the bed was too big, and her mind wouldn't stop thinking about the matriarch's warning. Cubs, learning to be warriors. Cubs who must never see softness. She wondered what they looked like. She wondered if they ever played games, or laughed, or did any of the things that children did on Earth. Or were they already little soldiers, serious and fierce from the moment they opened their eyes? She would probably never know. She had promised to stay away from them, but as she finally drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. Something that would change everything. For humans and Velthari alike. She had no idea how right she was. 3 days passed on the station. Yuna spent her time attending meetings, learning protocols, and trying to understand Velthari customs. It was exhausting work. The Velthari were not easy to deal with. They respected only strength, and every conversation felt like a battle. Even simple discussions about trade routes became contests of will. But Yuna was patient. She smiled when others would have frowned. She stayed calm when others would have shouted. And slowly, very slowly, some of the Velthari began to tolerate her presence. A few even seemed curious about her strange human ways. Taewoo handled the technical side of things, setting up communication systems and translation protocols. He was good at his job, quick and efficient, but he also noticed something that Yuna had been trying to ignore. They're watching you, he said one evening, as they ate dinner in their quarters. Yuna looked up from her food. Who? The cubs. Taewoo pointed toward the door with his fork. I've seen them 3 times today. They peek around corners when you walk by. They follow you through the corridors. I think you have fans. Yuna felt her heart flutter with excitement, but she kept her face neutral. The matriarch told us to stay away from them. You are staying away from them. They're not staying away from you. That night, Yuna was working late in the small office they had given her. She was writing a report about Velthari's social structures, trying to put her observations into words that the Galactic Council would understand. The station was quiet. Most of the Velthari had gone to their rest cycles. Then she heard it, a soft shuffling sound outside her door, then whispers, in the rough Velthari language. She couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the tone. It was the same tone human children used when they were daring each other to do something scary. She stood up slowly and walked to the door. For a moment, she hesitated. The matriarch's warning echoed in her mind. Do not approach our young. But she wasn't approaching them. She was just opening her door. That was different, wasn't it? She pressed the panel, and the door slid open. 7 Velthari cubs stood in the corridor, arranged in a careful line. They were much smaller than the adults, of course, but still bigger than Yuna. The largest one came up to her chest. The smallest one barely reached her waist. They were trying very hard to look terrifying. Their scales were puffed out, making them look bigger than they really were. Their tiny claws were extended, glinting in the corridor lights. Their mouths were open, showing rows of small but sharp teeth. And they were making sounds that were clearly meant to be fearsome roars, except they weren't fearsome at all. The sounds came out as squeaky growls, like kittens trying to be lions. The smallest cub in the front row was shaking with the effort of maintaining her scary face. Her eyes were squeezed shut with concentration. Yuna stared at them. They stared back, still trying to be scary. She knew she should close the door. She knew she should walk away and pretend this never happened. The matriarch would be furious if she found out. But looking at those little faces, those tiny warriors trying so hard to be fierce, Yuna felt something warm bloom in her chest. It was the same feeling she got when she saw puppies or kittens, or any young creature trying to act tough. She knelt down slowly, bringing herself closer to their level. The cubs' scary faces flickered with confusion. This was not how prey was supposed to react. Prey was supposed to run away screaming. "Oh my," Yuna said softly. "What brave warriors you are." The cubs looked at each other. This was clearly not in their training. No one had told them what to do if the prey gave them compliments. The largest cub, a male with dark blue scales, tried to growl louder. It came out as a sort of honking noise. Yuna had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. "Very scary," she said, nodding seriously. "You must have practiced very hard." The smallest cub opened her eyes. They were large and golden, filled with curiosity. Her scary face was completely gone now, replaced by confusion. "You are not scared," she said. Her voice was high and young, and her common tongue was clumsy but understandable. "Should I be scared?" Yuna asked. "Yes," another cub said, sounding almost offended. "We are Velthari. We are fierce. You are small and soft. You should be very scared." Yuna smiled gently. "I see. And what happens after I'm scared?" The cubs looked at each other again. It was clear they hadn't thought that far ahead. "You run away," the largest cub said finally. "And we chase you. And then we catch you. And then—" He trailed off, uncertain. "And then what?" "I don't know," he admitted. "We haven't learned that part yet." Yuna laughed softly. The sound seemed to startle the cubs. Velthari did not laugh. They made sounds of triumph or anger, but never this light, gentle noise. "What is that?" the smallest cub asked, stepping closer. "What are you doing with your mouth?" "I'm laughing. It's something humans do when they're happy or when something is funny." "Funny?" The cub tasted the word like it was new food. "What is funny?" Yuna thought about how to explain. "Funny is when something makes you feel light and warm inside. When something surprises you in a good way. Like your scary faces." They were very good scary faces. But they were also a little funny. Because you're small and cute, but you're trying to be big and fierce. "Cute?" Now the cub sounded offended. "We are not cute. Cute is for weak creatures. We are warriors." "You can be both," Yuna said. "Where I come from, Being cute is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're young and full of possibility. The cubs seemed to think about this. The smallest one took another step closer, until she was almost within arm's reach of Yuna. "I am Sora," she said suddenly. "What is your name?" "I'm Yuna. It's nice to meet you, Sora." "Sora, no," the largest cub said sharply. "We are not supposed to talk to them," Mother said. "Mother is sleeping," Sora replied. "And the human is interesting. She didn't run away. She said we were brave." She said we were cute," another cub muttered darkly. "That's not the same thing." Yuna sat down completely on the floor, crossing her legs. The movement made the cubs tense up again, their scary faces returning for a moment. But when Yuna just sat there, making no threatening moves, they slowly relaxed. "You're very different," Sora said, moving even closer. "Your scales are strange. They're soft and come off your head in strings." Yuna touched her hair. "It's called hair. Humans have it instead of scales. Does it protect you?" "Not really. It just keeps us warm." Sora reached out a small, clawed hand and touched Yuna's hair very gently. Her eyes went wide with wonder. "It's so soft," she whispered. "I've never felt anything so soft." The other cubs crowded closer, curious despite themselves. Soon, they were all reaching out to touch Yuna's hair, her clothes, her hands. They made small sounds of amazement at how different she was from anything they had known. Yuna sat perfectly still and let them explore. She knew this was important. This might be the first time these cubs had ever touched something gentle, something that didn't fight back or try to hurt them. "Why aren't you scared of us?" the largest cub asked finally. His name was Bora. She would learn later. "We could hurt you. Our claws are sharp." "I know," Yuna said. "But you haven't hurt me. You're just curious." "There's nothing scary about being curious. Our teacher says we must always be scary," Sora said quietly. "He says the universe is full of enemies. We must make everyone fear us, or they will destroy us." Yuna felt a deep sadness at those words. Such young creatures, already being taught that the world was their enemy. "Maybe," she said carefully, "there's more than one way to be safe. Maybe being scary isn't the only answer." The cubs looked at each other. This was clearly a new idea, something they had never considered. Somewhere in the station, a sound echoed. Adult footsteps. The cubs immediately scattered, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor with surprising speed. "Wait," Yuna called softly. But they were already gone. She sat alone on the floor, her heart full of strange emotions. Those little ones, so fierce and so innocent at the same time. They had come to scare her and ended up touching her hair with wonder in their eyes. She smiled to herself and went back inside her quarters. She had a feeling they would be back. Yuna was right. The cubs came back the next night. And the night after that, it became their secret routine. After the adults went to sleep, 7 small shadows would appear outside Yuna's door. They would practice their scary faces, and Yuna would pretend to be frightened. Then they would sit together on the floor, and the cubs would ask endless questions about humans, about Earth, about everything that was soft and strange and different. Taewoo knew about the visits, of course. He warned Yuna that she was taking a big risk. If the matriarch found out, there would be serious consequences. But he also helped keep watch, alerting Yuna whenever adult Velthari came near their section of the station. "You're going to get us kicked off this station," he said one night, shaking his head. "Maybe," Yuna admitted. "But look at them, Taewoo. Have you ever seen anyone so hungry to learn? They've been taught that the universe is nothing but enemies and threats. No one has ever told them there's another way to live. That's their culture. We can't just change it because we think ours is better." Yuna was quiet for a moment. "I'm not trying to change their culture. I'm just answering their questions." "Is that so wrong?" "Not." Taewoo had no answer for that. On the third night, something different happened. Yuna heard the familiar shuffling outside her door. But when she opened it, only one small figure stood in the corridor. It was Sora, the smallest cub. Her scales looked dull, and her usually bright eyes were clouded with sadness. Sora? Where are the others? They are in special training, Sora said quietly. They passed their fierceness evaluation. I did not. Yuna felt her heart tighten. Fierceness evaluation? All cubs must take it. We must show that we are strong and scary. We must prove that we are true Velthari warriors. Sora's voice broke slightly. I failed. My scary face was not good enough. My roar was too small. Teacher Keth said I am. He said I am too soft. The word came out like a curse, like something shameful and terrible. He said I bring shame to my bloodline. Sora continued, her small body starting to shake. He said I am like the weak creatures we hunt. He said maybe I should live with them instead of with true Velthari. Tears were running down her scaled face. Yuna hadn't even known Velthari could cry. But here was this little one, weeping like any child who had been told she wasn't good enough. Yuna's heart broke. She opened her arms. Come here, she said softly. Sora looked at her with confusion. What? Come here. Let me hold you. Sora didn't understand. Physical contact in Velthari culture was reserved for fighting or very specific rituals. Adults did not hold cubs. Cubs were expected to stand on their own, to never show weakness, to never seek comfort from anyone. But something in Yuna's voice, in her open arms, called to a deep need that Sora had never been allowed to acknowledge. Slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward. Yuna wrapped her arms around the small Velthari and pulled her close. Sora went stiff at first. Every instinct she had been taught screamed that this was wrong. She was a warrior. Warriors did not seek comfort. Warriors did not let themselves be held like helpless prey. But Yuna was so warm. Her arms were gentle but secure. Her sweater was soft against Sora's scales, and her heartbeat, slow and steady, created a rhythm that seemed to say, everything is okay. Everything is okay. Everything is okay. Something inside Sora cracked open. She had spent her whole life being told to be hard, to be fierce, to be strong. No one had ever just held her. No one had ever told her it was okay to be sad. No one had ever made her feel safe enough to let her guard down. She forgot to be fierce. All the tension drained out of her small body. She melted into Yuna's embrace like ice melting in the sun. And then, from deep in her chest, came a sound that surprised them both. A purr. It was soft at first, barely noticeable. But it grew stronger, vibrating through Sora's whole body. It was a sound of pure contentment, of peace, of comfort. It was a sound that Velthari cubs had not made in generations, because they had been trained to suppress it, to hide it, to be ashamed of it. But in Yuna's arms, held close and warm and safe, Sora couldn't stop it. She didn't want to stop it. There you go, Yuna whispered, stroking Sora's scales gently. It's okay. You're okay. Being soft isn't wrong, little one. Being soft just means you have a big heart. Teacher Keth says soft things get eaten. Sora mumbled into Yuna's shoulder. Teacher Keth doesn't know everything. Softness isn't weakness, Sora. It takes courage to be gentle. It takes strength to show kindness. The fiercest thing you can do sometimes is to be soft in a hard universe. Sora didn't fully understand. But the words felt true. They felt like something she had always known, but had been forbidden to believe. They sat like that for a long time. The human woman and the Velthari cub, holding each other in the quiet station corridor. Sora's purr continued, filling the silence with a sound like distant thunder, gentle and constant. Why are you so kind? Sora asked eventually. We are strangers. I am supposed to be your enemy. My people could hurt you. Why do you care about me? Yuna thought carefully about her answer. On my planet, we believe that all young creatures deserve love and kindness. It doesn't matter what species you are or where you come from. Children are precious. They deserve to feel safe. They deserve to be held when they're sad, even if they're not good at being fierce, especially then. Yuna pulled back slightly so she could look at Sora's face. Listen to me, little one. You are not a failure. You are not shameful. You are a beautiful young being with a gentle heart, and that is a gift, not a curse. But how will I survive? Sora asked, her voice small. If I am soft, the universe will crush me. That's what everyone says. Maybe, Yuna said. Or maybe the universe needs more softness. Maybe the universe is tired of everyone being hard and fierce and scary. Maybe what the universe really needs is people who are brave enough to be gentle. Sora thought about this. It was such a strange idea. Everything she had ever learned said the opposite. But sitting here, wrapped in warmth and kindness, she found herself wanting to believe. The others are watching, she said suddenly. Yuna looked up. In the shadows of the corridor, 6 pairs of eyes gleamed in the darkness. The other cubs had come back from their training. They had seen everything. We saw you make the soft sound, Bora said, stepping out of the shadows. His voice was strange, almost accusatory. You purred. Cubs are not supposed to purr. It was bred out of us long ago. I couldn't help it, Sora said, not moving from Yuna's arms. It just happened. The other cubs approached slowly. They looked at Sora in her comfortable position, wrapped in human warmth. They looked at Yuna, who showed no fear, only patience and kindness. They looked at each other. Does it feel good? One of them asked hesitantly. Being held? Sora nodded. It feels like nothing I've ever felt. It feels like being full. When you didn't know you were hungry. The cubs shifted nervously. They were warriors. They were not supposed to want soft things. But something in Sora's words, in her peaceful face, called to them. Could you? Bora started, then stopped. He looked away, ashamed of what he wanted to ask. Could I hold you too? Yuna finished for him. Bora nodded without meeting her eyes. Yuna smiled and opened her arms wider. All of you. Come here. One by one, the cubs approached. One by one, they settled around her, against her, finding spots where they could feel her warmth. It was awkward, and crowded, and wonderful. Yuna was buried under a pile of young Velthari, all of them seeking something they had never been allowed to have, and one by one, they began to purr. The sound filled the corridor, a chorus of contentment that echoed off the metal walls. 7 small warriors, fierce and deadly by design, purred like kittens in the arms of a human who had shown them a different kind of strength. They forgot to be fierce. They remembered how to be children, and Yuna held them all, knowing that this moment was changing something important. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if she would be punished or praised, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was right. These cubs deserved to be held, and she was going to hold them for as long as they needed. The secret meetings continued for a week. Every night, the cubs would sneak away from their sleeping quarters and gather in the corridor outside Yuna's room. They would practice their scary faces, which had become more of a game now than a real attempt at intimidation. Yuna would make exaggerated expressions of terror, throwing her hands up and pretending to shake with fear. The cubs would try to hold their fierce poses, but inevitably someone would break, and then they would all collapse into a sound that was becoming familiar to them. Laughter. Velthari did not have a word for laughter. They had words for triumph and mockery, but not for this light, joyful noise that bubbled up from inside when something was funny. The cubs had to create their own word for it. They called it the bright sound, and they treasured it like a secret. Yuna also brought them gifts from her quarters, soft things, mostly. A fluffy blanket that they loved to curl up in. Small plush toys that humans gave to children, which the cubs found endlessly fascinating. They would press the soft toys against their faces and make sounds of wonder, amazed that such gentle things could exist. Why do human cubs need soft things? Bora asked one night, clutching a small stuffed animal shaped like a bear. They help them feel safe. Yuna explained. When human children are scared or sad, holding something soft makes them feel better. It reminds them that they're not alone. Velthari cubs are not supposed to need help feeling safe, another cub said. But his arms were wrapped tightly around a plush rabbit. Everyone needs help sometimes, Yuna said. Even warriors. Especially warriors. Tae-woo watched all of this with growing worry. He was happy for the cubs, truly he was. But he knew this couldn't last. Sooner or later, someone would find out. And when they did, there would be consequences. His fears came true on the 8th night. It started with elder warrior Keth, the cubs' combat instructor. He was a massive Velthari, even bigger than the matriarch, with scars covering every inch of his visible scales. He was old and traditional, a believer in the ancient ways. He thought the peace talks were a mistake, and that dealing with humans was beneath the Velthari people. He had noticed changes in the cubs. Small changes, at first, easy to dismiss. They seemed less focused during training. They made strange sounds when they thought no one was listening. Worst of all, they had started to question things. Why do we have to be scary? What's wrong with being gentle? Where did the purr go? Keth didn't know what a purr was. No living Velthari did. It had been bred out of the species generations ago. Considered a weakness that had no place in a warrior culture. But somehow, these cubs had rediscovered it. He followed them one night. He watched from the shadows as they gathered outside the human's door. He watched as they played their strange game, making scary faces and then dissolving into the bright sound. He watched as they piled onto the human woman, seeking her warmth and softness. And he watched as they purred. His blood went cold. Then it went hot. He returned to the matriarch immediately. Matriarch Gris did not take the news well. She listened to Keth's report with growing anger, her claws digging into the armrests of her chair. When he finished, she stood up so abruptly that he took a step back. "Show me," she said. They walked through the station together, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Keth led her to the human section, to the spot where he had watched from the shadows. They arrived just as the cubs were settling down for their nightly gathering. What the matriarch saw stopped her cold. The human woman was sitting on the floor, surrounded by all 7 cubs. Bora, the largest and oldest, was draped across her lap, his eyes closed in peaceful sleep. Sora, the smallest, was tucked under her arm, purring so loudly that the sound filled the corridor. The other cubs were scattered around her, some playing with soft human toys, some simply sitting close enough to feel her warmth. They were practicing scary faces again. But it was clearly a game. Yuna made an exaggerated, terrified expression, and the cubs dissolved into laughter. They laughed, and the sound was bright and joyful, and completely unlike anything a Velthari should produce. "What have you done to them?" the matriarch whispered. Yuna looked up. She saw the matriarch standing in the corridor, Keth looming behind her, and she knew this moment had been coming. She had hoped it wouldn't come so soon, but she had always known it would arrive eventually. She didn't stand up. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to hide what she had been doing. Instead, she met the matriarch's eyes calmly and said, "I showed them that strength isn't the only thing worth having." The matriarch's face twisted with anger. "You corrupted them. You made them weak. Our cubs are supposed to be warriors, and you turned them into children," Yuna said quietly. "I turned them into children. Children who play and laugh and seek comfort when they're sad. Children who aren't afraid to be gentle. That's not what Velthari children are. Maybe it's what they could be." Keth stepped forward, his claws extended. "Matriarch, this human has committed a serious offense against our people. She has interfered with the development of our young. She has introduced foreign ideas and weaknesses into their minds. I recommend immediate removal from the station, perhaps punishment as well." The cubs had woken up now. They saw the adults and immediately tried to arrange themselves into proper warrior poses. But their hearts weren't in it. Sora stayed close to Yuna, and the others clustered around them protectively. "Yuna did nothing wrong," Bora said, surprising everyone including himself. "She was kind to us, that's all." "Kindness is not for warriors," Keth growled. "Maybe it should be," Sora said quietly. Keth turned on her with fury in his eyes. You. The soft one. The failure. Of course you would say that. You were always weak. Now we see why. You've been contaminated by this alien. Sora flinched as if she had been struck. Yuna felt the little one trembling against her side. Don't speak to her that way, Yuna said, her voice suddenly hard. She's a child. They're all children. They deserve patience and understanding, not cruelty. You dare lecture me about our own young? Keth stepped closer, looming over Yuna. You, a soft little prey creature? You know nothing of our ways. You know nothing of what it takes to survive in this galaxy. Yuna stood up slowly. She barely reached Keth's chest, but she didn't show any fear. I know that survival isn't everything. I know that there's more to life than being scary and strong. And I know that these cubs were hungry for something they weren't getting, something they needed, something that every young creature in the universe deserves. And what is that? Gentleness, Yuna said. Comfort. The knowledge that they are loved just as they are, not just for what they might become. The word hung in the air. Love. Keth looked like he had swallowed something bitter. Even the matriarch seemed taken aback. Velthari do not love, Keth said finally. Love is weakness. Love makes you vulnerable. We protect our young through strength, not sentiment. Is that true? Yuna asked softly. She turned to look at the matriarch. Is it true that Velthari do not love their children? The matriarch was silent for a long moment. Her eyes moved from the human woman to the cubs clustered around her. She saw the way they looked at Yuna. The trust in their eyes. The relaxation in their bodies. She saw the way they leaned toward her, seeking her warmth, and she saw something else. She saw herself. Many, many years ago. A small cub with silver scales. Crying in the dark because she had failed her fierceness evaluation. Crying alone, because no one came to hold her. No one told her it was okay. No one showed her gentleness. She had learned to be hard because that was the only way to survive. She had become matriarch through strength and ferocity, and an iron will that never bent. But looking at these cubs now, she wondered for the first time if that had been the only way. She wondered what she might have become if someone had held her when she cried. Keth, she said quietly, leave us. But matriarch, now, Keth hesitated, then bowed stiffly and walked away. His footsteps echoed angrily down the corridor until they faded into silence. The matriarch and Yuna stood facing each other. The cubs watched with wide eyes, uncertain what would happen next. You have created a problem for me, the matriarch said finally. I know, Yuna replied. I'm sorry for that. But I'm not sorry for what I did. The matriarch studied her for a long moment. Then she looked at the cubs, at their hopeful faces, at the soft toys still clutched in their claws. Neither am I, she said quietly. And that terrifies me more than any enemy I have ever faced. 1 week later, the diplomatic council chamber was full. Every important Velthari leader was present, either in person or through holographic projection. They sat in rows of raised seats, their scales gleaming under the chamber lights, their eyes fixed on the center of the room where Yuna and Tewu stood. Yuna had expected this to be her trial. She had expected accusations and anger, and possibly expulsion from the station. She had prepared herself to defend what she had done, even if it cost her everything. But Matriarch Gris had other plans. The matriarch stood at the front of the chamber, facing her people. She looked tired, Yuna thought. Tired but determined, like someone who had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. I have called this assembly to present a report, the matriarch began. Many of you have heard rumors about the human cultural liaison and her interactions with our cubs. Some of you have demanded her punishment. Some of you have called for the end of our peace negotiations with humanity. Before any decisions are made, I want you to see what I have seen. She activated a display screen. Images appeared, captured by the station's security systems. The cubs practicing their scary faces. The cubs laughing. The cubs curled up around Yuna, purring. The cubs playing with soft toys. The cubs being held when they cried. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some sounds were angry. Some were confused. Some were something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like longing. "What is that sound?" one of the elders asked, pointing at a recording of the cubs purring. "What are they doing?" "They are purring," the matriarch said. "It is a sound our species used to make, long ago, before we decided it was a weakness. These cubs have rediscovered it." "How is that possible?" "It was bred out of us generations ago." "Apparently not completely." The matriarch paused. The human did not teach them to purr. She simply created conditions where they felt safe enough to do it naturally. The ability was always there, inside them, inside all of us. We just learned to suppress it. Elder Keth stood up from his seat. "This is exactly the problem. This human has reawakened weaknesses that we worked hard to eliminate. Our cubs are supposed to be warriors. They are supposed to be fierce and strong. Instead, they are playing with soft toys and making baby sounds. This is corruption. This is contamination. This must be stopped." Several voices murmured agreement, but others stayed silent, watching the recordings with strange expressions on their faces. "I have spent this past week thinking about what I witnessed," the matriarch continued, ignoring Keth's outburst. "I have thought about our history, our traditions, our ways of raising young, and I have asked myself a question that I never thought to ask before. Why do we do things this way?" The chamber fell silent. "We teach our cubs to be fierce from birth. We train them to see the universe as full of enemies. We eliminate softness and gentleness because we believe these things are weaknesses that will get them killed. But why? Why do we believe this?" She looked around the chamber. "Because we have always believed it. Because our parents taught us, and their parents taught them, going back thousands of years. But has anyone ever asked if it's true? Has anyone ever wondered if there might be another way?" "Our way has kept us alive," Keth said harshly. "Our way has made us strong. Our way has made us feared across the galaxy." "Yes," the matriarch agreed. "And our way has also made us alone. Isolated. Hated. We have no allies. We have no friends. We have only enemies and prey. Is that really the best we can do? Is that really the only way to survive?" She gestured to Yuna, who stepped forward nervously. "This human is small and soft and has no natural weapons. By our standards, she should be weak. She should be prey." But she walked into a station full of Velthari, and she was not afraid. She met our cubs, and instead of running, she knelt down and complimented them. She showed them kindness without expecting anything in return. She held them when they were sad. She made them laugh. The matriarch's voice grew stronger. "And in doing so, she showed me something I had forgotten existed in our species. Joy without violence. Connection without dominance. Strength that does not require intimidation." "Pretty words," Keth said dismissively, "but the galaxy does not care about pretty words. The galaxy will crush those who are soft." "Will it?" The matriarch turned to face him directly. "The humans are soft by our standards. They are small and weak and have no armor, and yet they have spread across the galaxy. They have built alliances with dozens of species. They have survived and thrived not by being the strongest or the fiercest, but by being the kindest, by making friends instead of enemies, by helping others instead of hunting them." She turned back to the assembly. "Perhaps softness is not the weakness we thought it was. Perhaps it is a strength we never learned to use." The chamber was completely silent now. The Velthari leaders were listening. Really listening. For the first time, the matriarch nodded to someone at the back of the room. The doors opened, and 7 small figures walked in. The cubs. They looked nervous but determined. They walked to the center of the chamber and stood in a line, just as they had stood outside Yuna's door that first night. But this time, they weren't trying to be scary. Sora stepped forward. The smallest cub, the one who had been called a failure, who had been told she brought shame to her bloodline. She looked up at the assembly of warriors, at the most powerful Velthari in existence, and she spoke. The human didn't make us weak. Her voice was clear and strong, stronger than anyone expected. She showed us we were always more than our claws. She took a deep breath and continued. All my life, I was told I was too soft. I was told I would never be a real Velthari. I was told I should be ashamed of what I am. And I believed it. I hated myself for not being fierce enough. Her voice wavered but didn't break. Then Yuna held me. She told me that softness isn't weakness. She told me that gentleness takes courage. She told me that I am a beautiful young being with a gentle heart, and that is a gift, not a curse. Sora looked directly at Elder Keth, who had called her a failure so many times. I am soft, and I am not ashamed, because I know now that being soft in a hard universe is the bravest thing anyone can do. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Then, slowly, one of the elders stood up. She was ancient, even older than the matriarch, with scales so faded they were almost white. She looked at Sora for a long moment. I remember the purr, she said quietly. I remember making that sound when I was very young, before I learned to stop. I remember how it felt, safe, warm, loved. Her voice cracked slightly. I had forgotten. We all forgot. Another elder stood. My cub fails her fierceness evaluations. I punish her for it. I tell her she brings shame to our family. He paused, and his voice was thick with something that might have been regret. But maybe she is not the one who should be ashamed. One by one, more voices joined. Velthari, who had spent their whole lives being hard and fierce, admitting that they remembered softness, admitting that they had suppressed it, hidden it, been ashamed of it, admitting that they had been hungry for something gentle without ever knowing what it was. The matriarch listened to all of it. Then she turned to Yuna, and, slowly, painfully, she lowered herself to her knees. The gasp that went through the chamber was audible. A matriarch did not kneel. A matriarch knelt before no one. Will you teach us? Gris asked. Her voice was humble. Something it had never been before. Not to replace our ways, but to remember what we have forgotten. Will you help us learn to be gentle again? Yuna felt tears prickling at her eyes. She reached out and took the matriarch's clawed hand in her small human fingers. It would be my honor, she said. 1 year later, the galaxy had changed. The Velthari were no longer feared and isolated. They had become humanity's strongest allies, not because of their military might, but because humans had helped them remember how to be kind. Yuna ran an interspecies cultural exchange program, teaching gentleness to warrior species across the galaxy. Sora, the little cub who was once called Too Soft, had become the first Velthari to train as a human-style counselor. The cubs still practiced scary faces. It had become a tradition, a game that Velthari children played to remember where they came from. They would puff out their scales and extend their tiny claws and make squeaky roars at humans who would pretend to be terrified. And then, when the game was done, they would line up for hugs, because they had learned something important, something that the universe had needed to hear for a very long time. Being fierce had its place. Being strong had its value, but the greatest strength of all was the courage to be gentle. The human who smiled and hugged them until they forgot to be fierce had taught them that, and somehow, that made them braver than they had ever been before.